George Cooper drove to the church on a Tuesday night. He was not scheduled to be there. He was not picking anyone up. He was not attending a service. He drove to the church because he felt guilty. He had been spending time with Brenda Sparks, the neighbor, and the guilt was eating him. Not because he had done anything, but because he almost had. He stopped himself. He went home. He sat on the patio, and then he thought about Mary, his wife, the woman he had been failing to connect with for months. And he decided to do something he almost never did. He decided to show up for her unannounced. To surprise her, to be the husband she kept telling him he was not. He drove to the church. He parked in the lot. He walked toward the building, and before he reached the door, he saw something in the parking lot that stopped him. Mary was outside. She was not alone. She was with a man. They were laughing. She was smoking a cigarette, something George did not even know she did. And the man standing next to her, close to her, sharing a lighter and a joke and the kind of easy intimacy that George had not felt from his own wife in years, was Pastor Rob. George stood in the parking lot and watched his wife laugh with another man in the dark outside a church, and something inside him shifted. Not broke. Shifted. The way a foundation shifts before a house starts cracking. You do not hear it. You do not see it. But everything built on top of it is never level again. I have to be upfront with you about something before we go any further. This video is about an affair, but it is not the affair you think it is. And whether it even qualifies as an affair depends on a question that the show deliberately never answers. A question the writers left open on purpose. And a question that I think is the most important unanswered question in the entire Young Sheldon franchise. Did Mary Cooper cross the line with Pastor Rob? I have spent more hours than I am comfortable admitting rewatching every single scene between Mary and Pastor Rob. Frame by frame, conversation by conversation, looking for the moment, the one that proves it, or the one that proves it did not happen. And what I found is not a clear answer. What I found is something worse. I found a show that spent 2 full seasons building every single ingredient of an affair and then refused to cook the meal. And the question of whether that makes Mary innocent or the writers cowardly is something I genuinely cannot decide. So let me walk you through everything. Every scene, every clue, every moment where the line gets thinner, and at the end I will tell you what I think actually happened, and what I wish the producers had the courage to show. Before we start, I need to explain a concept because it changes how you evaluate everything Mary does with Pastor Rob. There is a term in relationship psychology called an emotional affair. It was defined by Dr. Shirley Glass in her research on infidelity. An emotional affair occurs when a person in a committed relationship forms a deep emotional bond with someone outside that relationship. It includes sharing personal feelings, seeking emotional support, creating intimacy through conversation, and developing a connection that displaces the emotional role of the spouse. The key distinction is this: a physical affair is about the body, an emotional affair is about the soul. And Dr. Glass found something that should terrify every married person who reads her work. She found that emotional affairs are more damaging to marriages than physical ones. Because a physical affair can be a mistake, a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment. An emotional affair is a choice made every single day. Every conversation is a choice to give someone else what belongs to your partner. Every shared secret is a withdrawal from one account and a deposit into another. Keep that definition in your mind as I walk you through what Mary Cooper did with Pastor Rob. Because every single criterion of an emotional affair is met across the show. Every single one. And the only criterion that is not met is the physical one. And the question of whether that last line was crossed is the question the show refuses to answer. Pastor Rob shows up in the show as the new youth pastor at the church, and the show introduces him in a way that is almost predatory in its precision. He is young, he is attractive, he is modern, he wears casual clothes, he plays guitar, he connects with the teenagers in a way that Pastor Jeff never could. He is everything Pastor Jeff is not, and he is everything George is not. That contrast is deliberate. The show puts George and Pastor Rob on screen in the same episodes and lets the audience feel the difference. George comes home tired from coaching. His shirts are wrinkled, his conversation is about bills and schedules and who is picking up the kids. Pastor Rob shows up at church rested and charismatic. His conversation is about feelings and faith and the deeper meaning of life. George offers Mary logistics. Pastor Rob offers Mary philosophy. George gives Mary a household to manage. Pastor Rob gives her a world to explore. And Mary chooses the exploration, not explicitly, not with a decision she could point to and say, "This is the moment I chose him over George." She chooses it the way people always choose emotional affairs. One conversation at a time, one shared cigarette at a time, one confession at a time, until the distance between where she stands and where the line is gets so thin that the question of whether she crossed it becomes almost academic. Let me walk you through the evidence, because the show does not hide it. The show puts it right in front of you and lets you decide what to call it. The smoke breaks. Mary and Pastor Rob begin sharing cigarettes outside the church. Mary does not smoke at home. George does not know she smokes. This is a behavior she performs exclusively in Pastor Rob's presence. Think about what that means psychologically. She has created a version of herself that exists only for one person. A version that smokes and laughs and shares secrets in a parking lot. That version does not exist for George. George gets the version that cooks dinner and manages Sheldon's schedule and goes to bed early. Pastor Rob gets the version that stays late and lights up and talks about feelings under the stars. That split, the creation of a separate self for another person, is one of the primary indicators of an emotional affair in Dr. Glass's research. It means the person is not just sharing time with someone outside the marriage. They are sharing a version of themselves that the spouse does not even know exists. And here is where it gets worse. The conversations between Mary and Pastor Rob escalate across the season. They start with church business. They progress to personal feelings. Mary tells Rob things about her marriage that she has never told George. She shares her doubts, her frustrations, her fears about Sheldon leaving, her feelings of being trapped in Medford. She gives Rob the emotional currency that a wife is supposed to spend at home. And Rob receives it. He does not redirect her to her husband. He does not say, "Mary, have you talked to George about this?" He does not create boundaries. He absorbs her vulnerability and gives her validation in return. He tells her she is strong. He tells her she is brave. He tells her that her faith is inspiring. He fills the exact hole that George's emotional absence has created, and he does it with the authority of a pastor, which gives the entire dynamic a layer of spiritual legitimacy that makes it almost impossible for Mary to recognize what she is doing. Because in Mary's mind, this is not an affair. This is ministry. This is pastoral care. This is spiritual mentorship. She is not meeting a man in a parking lot. She is meeting a pastor at a church. And as long as the setting is sacred, the behavior cannot be sinful. That is the logic. And it is the most dangerous logic in the entire show. And then there are the dreams. Mary has romantic dreams about Pastor Rob. The show includes them. They are on screen. Mary dreams about this man in a way that is explicitly romantic, and the show lets you see it. Now here is the thing about dreams. You cannot control them. Having a dream about someone does not make you guilty of anything, but the show includes the dreams for a reason. The writers chose to show the audience that Mary's subconscious is processing Pastor Rob as a romantic figure, not a spiritual mentor, not a colleague, a romantic figure. Her sleeping brain has already crossed the line that her waking brain is pretending does not exist. And Mary does not tell George about the dreams, obviously. But she also does not tell herself the truth about what the dreams mean. She does not pull back from Rob after waking up from a dream about him. She does not create distance. She goes back to church. She goes back to the parking lot. She goes back to the smoke breaks. She takes the evidence that her own unconscious mind is presenting her with and ignores it, because acknowledging it would mean admitting something she is not prepared to admit. And here is the part that makes me genuinely angry on a rewatch. During the exact same period that Mary is having smoke breaks and sharing confessions and dreaming about Pastor Rob, she discovers that George has been spending time with Brenda Sparks, the neighbor. George and Brenda are drinking together. They are talking. There is an emotional connection. It is similar in kind, if not in degree, to what Mary has with Rob. Two lonely people finding comfort in someone who listens. And Mary goes nuclear. She confronts Brenda directly. She is furious. She weaponizes guilt. She treats George like he has already committed adultery when in fact he has done nothing more than what she has been doing every Tuesday night in the church parking lot. The hypocrisy is not subtle, it is structural. It is the foundation of Mary's entire moral framework. If it happens in a church, it is ministry. If it happens in a bar, it is sin. The location determines the morality, not the behavior. George almost crossed the line with Brenda. Almost. He came close enough to touch it, but he stopped himself. He went home. He chose his marriage. And nobody ever gave him credit for the line he did not cross. Because nobody knew how close he came. But Mary, who is closer to crossing her own line than George ever was to crossing his, who has been sharing a private version of herself with another man for months, Mary judges George for the appearance of what she is actually doing. And that brings us back to the parking lot. The night George drove to the church to surprise Mary. Remember where George's head is in this moment. He has been carrying guilt about Brenda. He has been feeling like a bad husband. He has been sitting on the patio drinking beer and wondering where his marriage went. And in a moment of genuine effort, a moment where George Cooper tries to be better, he gets in his truck and drives to the church to meet his wife. And he sees her, laughing, smoking, with a young, attractive pastor in the dark outside a church, sharing something George has never been invited into. A version of Mary that does not exist inside their house. A version that laughs freely and smokes secretly and looks at another man the way she used to look at George, before Sheldon, and the church, and the bills, and the distance consumed everything. George sees this, and he says nothing. Think about that. He does not confront Mary, he does not approach Pastor Rob, he does not make a scene. He absorbs it the way he absorbs everything, silently, on the patio, with a beer, adding this new weight to a frame that is already bending under the load of everything else he carries alone. And here is the detail that breaks me every time I rewatch this scene. George drove there to be better. He drove there because he felt guilty about his own behavior and wanted to reconnect with his wife. He was trying. For the first time in a long time, he was actively trying. And his reward for trying was seeing his wife sharing a cigarette and a laugh and a secret life with a man who is younger, more present, and more emotionally available than George has been in years. George's guilt about Brenda brought him to the church. Mary's relationship with Rob sent him home. He arrived trying to fix his marriage and left knowing it might already be broken. And he never told Mary what he saw. He never used it against her. He just went home and sat on the patio and drank his beer and added another brick to the wall of silence that was slowly turning a football coach into a ghost. So here is the question. Did Mary cross the physical line with Pastor Rob? The show never answers this directly, and I have gone through every frame looking for a definitive moment. It does not exist. The writers built every single element of an affair. The secrecy, the private self, the emotional displacement, the dreams, the hypocrisy with Brenda, the parking lot. They built the entire staircase and then refused to show you the top step. And here is what I think happened. I think the writers made a deliberate choice. They decided that showing Mary physically cheating would destroy her character beyond repair. The audience would never forgive her. The show is framed through Sheldon's narration, and Sheldon cannot know about something that happened in private. And more importantly, the show needs Mary to survive as a complex character, not a villain. So they left the door open. They gave you every piece of evidence except the verdict. And they let the audience fight about it in comment sections for years. But here is what the show does prove beyond any doubt. Whether Mary's affair with Pastor Rob was emotional or physical, it destroyed George from the inside. Before Pastor Rob, George is a tired man. After Pastor Rob, George is a hollow man. The difference is visible on screen if you watch for it. His drinking increases. His time on the patio increases. His engagement with the family decreases. He stops trying to connect with Mary because the one time he tried, he found her in a parking lot with someone else. He stops fighting for the marriage because fighting requires believing you have something worth fighting for. And George, after that night at the church, is not sure he does. The show gives George a near affair with Brenda, and then George pulls back. The show gives Mary a near affair with Rob, and then the show looks away. George is punished for his almost. Mary is protected from hers. And the man who stopped himself gets no credit, while the woman who may not have stopped gets no blame. That asymmetry is the show's greatest moral failure. And it is the reason George Cooper died believing he was the problem in his own marriage, when in fact he might have been the only one trying to fix it. And now here is where I am going to say something that might be controversial. But I have been thinking about it for weeks and I need to get it out. The show was building to a confession. There are moments in Season 6 where it feels like Mary is about to tell George the truth about Rob, about the conversations, about the dreams, about the version of herself that only exists in the church parking lot. The show is leaning toward a confrontation that would have been the most important scene in the entire series. Mary admitting to George that she gave someone else the emotional intimacy she should have given him. That scene never comes. George dies before it can happen. Mary never confesses. She never apologizes. She never tells George what she was doing while he was sitting alone on the patio wondering what he did wrong. The heart attack is not just a plot device. It is a narrative escape hatch. It removes George from the story before the story has to hold Mary accountable. And then what does Mary do after George dies? She rewrites him. She tells everyone he was a drunk and a cheater. She constructs a version of George that makes her the victim. And the only person who could contradict that version, the man who drove to the church to surprise his wife and saw something that changed him, is in the ground. Mary Cooper got away with it. Not because she was innocent, but because the one person who knew the truth died before he could speak. And this is where I need to be honest about something that has been bothering me since I started this video. I wish the producers had shown it. I wish they had given us the scene. Not the physical affair necessarily, but the confession. The moment where Mary looks at George and says, "I have been giving someone else the things that belong to you." If only the producers had added one scene. One conversation. Mary telling George the truth about Pastor Rob, not about a physical affair, about the emotional one, about the smoke breaks and the conversations and the dreams and the private self she created for another man. If they had written that scene, George would have had the chance to respond, to fight for his marriage, to say, "I know because I saw you in the parking lot and I never told you because I thought it was my fault." That scene would have changed the entire franchise. George would have died knowing the truth instead of dying with a question he never asked. Mary would have entered the Big Bang Theory as a woman who faced her guilt instead of a woman who buried it under religion. And the audience would not be sitting here years later debating whether something happened in a parking lot that the show refused to show. The show built the staircase. Every step is there. The secrecy, the intimacy, the displacement, the dreams, the hypocrisy, the parking lot, the guilt that Mary buries under God after George dies. Every step leads to the top. And the producers stopped one step before the landing. I do not know if Mary Cooper crossed the physical line with Pastor Rob. The show does not tell me, but I know she crossed the emotional line. I know she gave another man the version of herself that George needed. I know she smoked cigarettes in a parking lot, and laughed at jokes and shared fears, and created a world that her husband was not invited into. I know that George saw it and said nothing because saying something would require George to believe he deserved better. And George Cooper never believed he deserved anything. The affair that may or may not have happened is not the story. The story is that Mary found someone who made her feel seen and chose to keep seeing him while the man who slept next to her every night was disappearing into a silence she could have broken at any time. George Cooper drove to the church on a Tuesday night to surprise his wife. He felt guilty about his own behavior and wanted to try. He wanted to be the husband she kept telling him he was not. He parked in the lot. He walked toward the building, and he saw his wife laughing in the dark with a man who gave her everything George no longer could. He went home. He sat on the patio. He drank his beer. He never mentioned it. He never confronted her. He never used it as ammunition. He just folded it into the silence he was already carrying and added it to the weight that was slowly, quietly, invisibly pressing down on a heart that would stop beating in a room at work on the best day of his professional life. George Cooper was accused of being a drunk and a cheater by the woman who smoked secret cigarettes with a young pastor in a church parking lot. He was called a bad husband by the woman who gave her best conversations to another man. He was remembered as the problem by the woman who may have been the one who broke things first. And the man who drove to the church to try one more time never got to ask the only question that mattered, the question that would have changed everything. The question the show refused to let him ask. "Mary, what are we?" He never asked. She never told. And the parking lot kept the secret that both of them were too afraid to say out loud. If only the producers had let one of them speak. Just once. Just one scene. Just one honest conversation between a husband who saw too much and a wife who shared too much and a parking lot that held it all in the dark. But they did not. And George took the secret to his grave. And Mary buried it under God. If this hit you the way it hit me, go watch the George Cooper video right here. Because the man in the parking lot and the man on the patio are the same man. And nobody ever asked him what he was carrying. Welcome to Cooper Untold. We are just getting started.